Welcome, everyone, to our September meeting of the Christian Fiction Fans Book Club. And we are here with Sharon Mondragon. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She is not just a nice lady who knits. And if you read this book, you probably got an inkling that she knows a thing or two about knitting. But she's also the author of award-winning fiction that takes you to the place where courage and kindness meet. I love that. Like some of the characters in The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady, she was once content to live well within her comfort zone. At the age of 19, however, she realized that she would not have much to show for such a life. She accepted the challenge and recklessly prayed for adventure. Well, there was your first mistake. This book, The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady, won the prestigious American Christian Fiction Writers 2017 Genesis Contest, which is a competition for unpublished fiction. She spent many years as an army spouse and the mother of 5 wildly individual children. I also have 5 wildly individual children, so we'll have to compare notes. The army years are over, but the adventure continues in Texas, where Sharon lives with her husband, her laptop, and her yarn stash. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Well, I'm gonna make this smaller here because we want to just see you. Um, Tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an author. This is the first book you published, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I first saw the potential and the wonder of being an author when I was 8 years old. My third grade teacher, the incomparable Ernestine Wright, read us The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I was captivated by that book and by the entire series. I I loved Aslan. I wished there really was one. And I decided I wanted to write to Mr. Lewis to tell him how much I loved his books, only to find out that he had died 3 years before. And you would think a little girl would be devastated by this news. But I was struck with wonder at the idea that you could, if you wrote something really good, you could touch people's hearts and lives even after you were gone. And from that time on, that seemed to me to be the highest thing to which I could aspire, which meant that I didn't think I could do it.
Of course.
And as I approached college, I didn't pursue a journalism or creative writing degree because I just didn't think I had enough to say. And so I majored in psychology instead. I actually have 2 degrees, a bachelor's degree and a master's in clinical applied psychology. But then when my first child was born, almost 2 months early, I suddenly had a lot to say, things that I wanted to say to comfort and encourage the other mothers of premature babies.
Yeah.
And the first article that I wrote about it was accepted. And the coolest thing about that was, I mean, it was really cool to get the acceptance letter and to get the contract and to get the check and to see my article in print and learn a whole lot from everything they cut out of it.
Yeah.
But the best part was women who got in touch with me, either by writing letters to the editor or by
Mhm.
actually going to their libraries and finding my address so they could
Wow.
write to me. This was back in the 80s before we could look things up
Sure.
online.
Yeah.
And to have them say, I thought I was the only person who felt like this.
Oh.
I don't feel alone anymore.
Mhm.
But then, Deb, as you know, when the children keep coming, your life gets very filled with that.
Yeah.
And I put it on the back burner. I had a few more articles published, but I put it on the back burner, especially because we were homeschooling and moving while we were in the military.
Sure.
And so there was just too much else going on to edit the way you need to edit if you're going to submit things for publication. But then when the last of my children transitioned to public school, and I was alone in the house for the first time during the school day in 20 years, I had already decided what I was going to do after the children grew up, what I was going to be. And I began to teach myself to write fiction. And it was a very long apprenticeship. I started in 2004, and I wasn't published until 2021. I got an agent in 2018. There was a lot of writing, a lot of learning. I wrote short stories first because that helped me to get a better handle on plotting and putting a story together. A novel is like a marathon, and a short
Yeah.
story is like a sprint. And I also acquired a mentor along the way who advised me not so much in my actual writing, but in getting an agent and in the whole publishing journey. She was very encouraging and is still encouraging me today. But it was, as anybody who has written a book and wanted to get it traditionally published knows, there was a lot of disappointment and heartbreak along the way.
Sure.
Things that I thought were going to work out that didn't, but I just kept going because I wanted it so much. I wanted to be able to communicate and touch people's hearts and lives so much.
That is beautiful. So I want to hear a little bit more about this learning to write process that you started in 2004, you said.
Yes.
So did you take any classes? Did you join writing groups? How did you learn, or just reading craft books or?
Well, I realize now, looking back, that those years when I was homeschooling, I was actually working on writing, even though I was only doing personal writing,
Yeah.
because I still read voraciously. I
Uh-huh.
need to read like I need to breathe.
Yeah.
And between 5 kids and all my reading, the house was never perfect. But luckily, I have a husband who doesn't mind, um, who respects my need to read. Let's put it that way. And so I look back now at what I call my hidden years, where I was really gaining a lot of understanding about how plots work. I
Yeah.
wasn't doing it consciously, but
Right.
I was absorbing it.
Yeah.
But I did read a lot of craft books and did a lot of practicing, with just short pieces, descriptions, things like
Hmm.
that. But the same year that I was starting to teach myself to write fiction, I experienced my first really big loss in life. My father passed away in September of 2004. And I had never really been around the whole rituals of a death before.
Hmm.
And I was processing it. And where I was focusing on the processing was not only the value of my dad's life, but the whole ritual of the funeral.
Yeah.
And one of the things that helps me cut pain down to size is humor.
Hmm.
And I began a series of short stories that actually became, one of them became my most recent book, Grandma Ruth Doesn't Go to Funerals, to break down and process this whole idea of my father dying and there being a funeral. And the stories just kind of grew one after the other. There's about 10 of them now. 2 of them I've expanded into full-length books, and one of them has been published. But it was craft, and it was also writing the short stories. And one of the things that really amazed me, I only took one class, but I've been a regular at ACFW, American Christian Fiction Writers, for a while. And I listened to James Scott Bell in a workshop where he talked about the middlemost moment of a movie or a book, that you can find the core, the theme in the middlemost moment. He watched movie after movie and stopped them in the exact middle and found that it was true.
Yeah.
And so I began to look at my short stories about Grandma Ruth, and lo and behold, it was true. Halfway through the story was that middlemost moment, the core of the story. And even in The Dragon Lady, that moment um, where Jane is realizing what Father Pete was really trying to accomplish there under
Mhm.
the Christmas Eve service, that's in almost the exact middle of the book.
Interesting. Yeah. So, The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady is your first published book.
Yes.
And what was kind of the impetus? When did you decide this is good enough? I'm ready to enter it into this ACFW contest, the Genesis contest, or had you entered with other pieces before, or was this your first one?
Um, I had, at my mentor's urging, I had submitted a short story to the, let's see, it's a very long title, the Saturday Evening Post Great American Short Story
Okay.
Contest in 2014. I entered that one because it was the only one I had that was the right length, and it took eighth place, so it was honorable
Okay.
mention. And so that was my first
Yeah.
win. Well, actually, I'd had one before. It was a really small contest, and what I told my husband when I showed him the certificate, I said, "Do you know what this means?" He goes, "You won." I said, "No, this means I don't totally suck at fiction."
Sometimes we just need that little piece of encouragement to keep us
Yes,
going, right?
yes, yes. Um, so that short story won the Saturday Evening Post one, but then I had been working on the Dragon Lady book, and I had pitched it at the Dallas Writers Conference, and I'd gotten a request for a full manuscript, and when she got back to me, she said, "Agents can be so kind. They know how fragile our egos can be." She says, "It's a very soothing book." And I realized right away what she meant. Number one, the pacing was too slow. And number two, there was not nearly enough conflict, which, if you know me, makes a whole lot of sense. So I did a ruthless revision. I jettisoned 8,000 words and an
Wow.
entire character, but it tightened it up.
Uh-huh.
And I added more conflict, and the book was better. And when the Genesis contest came up, I looked at my word count, and it was just at the upper end.
Mhm.
70,000 words was the upper end. And I thought, okay, this is what I've got that I can enter.
Yeah.
My mentor thinks I should be entering things. Okay. And I was very, very surprised to make the semifinals, and even more surprised to make the finals. And my husband was telling me, "You're going to win." I said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know. There are people that have been at this a lot longer than me. I
Yeah.
don't." And when I came off the podium, um, first I said to the lady who helped me down, "I didn't die and I didn't throw up." But my husband met me at the back of the room and said, "I told you you were going to win. I'm so proud of you."
That's sweet. What a wonderful support it sounds like he is to you.
Yes. Yes.
That's neat. Um, so tell us about what came after that then. So you published The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady, and it has a sequel.
Yes. Yes. I have it here. My husband brought it downstairs for me. It's called The Tangle Tale of the Wool Gathering Castoffs.
And that one I have not read yet, but does it have the same characters then?
It has many of the same characters. Rose is still very prominent in this one, whereas the other Heavenly Hugs have taken a little bit more of a back seat.
Okay.
Because if you remember at the end of the Dragon Lady book, because of Jenny's concern for people who have a loved one in memory care, she suggests that they start their own prayer shawl group.
Yeah.
And so this story is about that prayer shawl group
Okay.
and their influence on especially a man who's really, really lost since his
Hmm.
wife was sent to memory care. Well, since he had to place her there, he
Yeah.
kept her at home for as long as he could, but he wasn't sleeping. She wasn't safe. And his children actually staged an intervention and said, you can't keep doing this.
Okay. Yeah. I know one of our book club members who's not on here tonight said when she heard what the title was for this month, she immediately got it, read it, and then read the next one all in 1 week. I think she read both of
Oh my
those.
goodness.
And she said they were both great. And then after that, then came the Grandma Ruth Doesn't Go to Funerals.
Yes, which is
And
very
when
different from the prayer shawl books.
Yes, I actually read Grandma Ruth first, and then I read The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady. And I was like, which one should we do for our book group? Because they're both great. And I loved the Grandma Ruth book. And yeah, I don't know if you want to tell the concept of that one a little bit.
Well, Grandma Ruth is a Southern matriarch. I lived in Georgia for 5 years and absolutely adored and inhaled the culture. She's a Southern matriarch who's bedridden. And my inspiration for her was that there have been 3 women in my life who've been bedridden in their final years. 2 of them handled it badly, and 1 of them handled it well. The 2 who handled it badly, their worlds shrunk to the size of a television screen.
Mhm.
And the third one, my husband's grandmother, we called her Abuelita or Little Grandma or just Little for short. When my father-in-law asked her, because she was living with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, do you want a television? She said, no, I stay in my bed and pray. And she had 3 things that kept her world as large as it had ever been. She had her rosary, and you knew that she was calling our names to the Lord every single day. She had a telephone with very large buttons, and she would call her friends, she would call her family. One time she accidentally called the police. They knew that an elderly person was living in the home, so they came by to check on her. And as they came up the stairs, she held out her thin little wrist and said, okay, take me away. And then she kept cookies under her bed so that when children came to the house to visit, they would go upstairs. She
Yeah.
loved children. She raised 8 of her own.
Oh, wow.
She practically raised all 8 of my husband and his 7 siblings and countless other grandchildren, cousins, etc. She adored children. She was wonderful with children. And as she lay dying, she had the good Hispanic death that she wanted, dying at home with her family around her, singing hymns in Spanish, reading the scriptures in Spanish to her. And she was hanging on by a thread. And suddenly one of the great grandsons piped up, little, little. And she roused herself and said, "¿Qué, hijito?" "Yes, son." He goes, "Can I have a cookie?" And so that's where the idea came for Grandma Ruth, who, though she is bedridden, keeps her finger very tightly on the pulse of the fictional town of Rayburn's Ferry. She calls it information. Other people may call it gossip. We're not going to quibble. She has a granddaughter named Sarah Elizabeth. Sarah Elizabeth is 24, and she has been under Grandma Ruth's thumb since she was small. Now that she's an adult, well, her grandmother has been teaching her how to attend a Southern funeral since she was small. At the age of 10, she learned to write a tasteful condolence note. When she was 11, she learned to make the signature family macaroni and cheese that the McCrady's always take to the reception. And she attended her first funeral at the age of 12. Grandma Ruth wanted to take her sooner, but Sarah's mother actually got her own way for once. So now that Sarah is 24 and Grandma is bedridden, she considers Sarah not only qualified, but socially obligated to attend all the funerals that Grandma Ruth can't attend anymore, but she does not want to go to P.B. Harrington's funeral because Grandma Ruth also has Sarah visit her shut-in friends. And one time when she was visiting the Harringtons, PB threw a plate at his wife because his toast was the teensiest bit burnt around the edges. And she tells Grandma Ruth, you won't have to ask me twice to go to Mrs. Harrington's funeral because she just went right back into the kitchen and made him another piece of toast. But I don't want to take off work for the likes of P.B. Harrington. And meanwhile, she's saying this while she's staring at her toes because she knows she's out of line.
Yeah.
And when she finally looks up, Grandma Ruth tells her, this funeral is for Mrs. Harrington. She loved him, and he wasn't always a plate thrower. But there is a surprise at the funeral reception. Mrs. Harrington is a basket case at the funeral, which you can expect. They were married over 60 years. But at the funeral reception, the woman who Sarah had only ever seen sipping tea at a funeral reception is chugging Chardonnay and finally bursts out with his very last words were, I loved you more than Millie. And she's very upset because they were high school sweethearts. She only thought he only ever loved her. And it's like she's lost her husband twice. So the rest of the story is figuring out who Millie is because Sarah just can't bear to see Mrs. Harrington grieving like that. But also, she is also grieving the loss of a relationship. She set her heart on a young man who was not worthy of her love, who she caught cheating on her 2 weeks before their wedding. And she's convinced that P.B. Harrington cheated on his wife because after all, that's the way they all are, with the exception of possibly her father and Grandma Ruth's husband. So there's a lot at stake here, and
Yeah.
that's the premise of the story.
Yes, such a good one. When I read the title, I thought, oh, she's older. And so she thinks, I don't want to face death. And that's why I'm not going to the funeral. And so when I got into it just right away and realized, oh, it's not that she doesn't want to go, it's that she can't go, but she is orchestrating everything to make sure that these people are taken care of in all the right ways. And yeah, that's another just delightful story. So I highly recommend it if you guys are looking for more good books by Sharon. Lots of good stuff. So tell us, let's go back to The Yarn of the Dragon Lady. How long did it take you to write that novel?
Well, the first draft, I think, took about a year and a half because um, we I started it in September of 2014, but we got out of the Army in December of 2014. So there was all that upheaval of getting out, finding a new home, et cetera, et cetera. But my husband took a 2-month locum tenens in Montgomery, Alabama, and we lived in a residential hotel. And I had nothing to do but write. And so what had been going along at a snail's pace suddenly came together, and I was able to finish it in the spring of 2015.
Nice. And then the revisions start. How long did that take for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I did one just revision myself and cut out a few scenes. But then after I heard back from that agent who didn't offer me representation, but gave me extremely good advice.
Hmm.
Like I said, it took several months to just really be ruthless
Yeah.
and say, I love this line, I love this scene, but I'm getting rid of it because
Hmm.
it doesn't add to things. And then once that was done, I entered it and it won. And there was a little bit of interest from agents, but one agent told me in its present form, I can't sell it, which I understood to mean it's not long enough.
Mm.
That's fine because I entered it in the short novel category.
Okay.
And so I asked her, would you look at it again if I made it longer? And she said yes. So I I expanded it, added that character back in. I added 8,000 words back, but they weren't the same 8,000 words.
Mhm.
And it was really good because I discovered that there was a whole lot more going on with Kanisha than I realized. I didn't realize she
Mm.
was quite so driven
Yeah.
until I put her back in. And then um, the next year in 2018, I went to ACFW and I pitched the Grandma Ruth book to the woman who
Mhm.
is now my agent.
Okay.
And I pitched the Dragon Lady book to Janir Trump, who was an editor at Kriegel at the time. And unbeknownst to me, Janir was waiting for that book
Ah,
because one of the judges you don't know who the judges are for the contest
right.
unless they tell you. And we all had to write thank you notes to the judges, and that gave this judge my contact information. And it was Susie Finkbeiner, and she says, "I
Oh,
love this book. Um, you really should pursue getting it published." And unbeknownst to me, she had talked to Janir about it.
okay.
So Janir was waiting for it, and so she asked for a full manuscript, and my agent, Allie Herring, asked me for a synopsis in the first 3 chapters of the Grandma Ruth book. 6 weeks later, um, Allie offered me representation, and in that same week, Janir said she was going to be taking the Dragon Lady to the acquisitions meeting.
Wow.
So my agent didn't know anything about the Dragon Lady book. So she says, "I can't believe I got a twofer."
Yeah. Very exciting.
Yeah. So then the very first time that the book went to acquisitions, they passed on it.
Okay.
And something that I've learned from making prayer shawls is that prayer shawls make their way into the hands of people who need them at exactly the right time. Not a moment before, not a moment too late. And so I took that lesson into the publication of the book, that it would be published when it was supposed to be. So I wasn't completely discouraged about it being passed on, especially because just a few months later, I was at ACFW again, and I made a point of seeking Janir out and thanking her for loving the book enough to take it to acquisitions.
Yeah.
And she told me, well, the only reason they passed on it was because we had another book coming out on that same list that was similar in tone.
Mm,
So if I had not had a grateful heart, I wouldn't have known that.
yeah.
And so gratitude really has protected my heart in this journey to a large extent. And so the next time there was a space for it in the acquisitions meeting, Janir asked for it again. And that's when they accepted it.
Wonderful. That's great. What an interesting story that just the way it kind of came full circle for you and the timing was not right. So let's talk a little bit about prayer shawls. You just mentioned that. So tell us about, your involvement in prayer shawls and then we want to know is this story based on your prayer shawl group or is there some truth hidden in there?
Oh, there's a bit of truth hidden in there. I've been knitting since I was 7. My mother taught
Wow.
me. But as you can imagine, as a military wife, we moved often, and I was often the new girl at church, looking
Mhm.
for a way to make friends. And when we got to Georgia, to Holy Comforter Church, I saw in the bulletin that they had a prayer shawl group. I thought, I know my way around a pair of knitting needles. This is where I'm going to find my friends. First, however, I had to find them because they met at this place called Earth Fair, not at the church. I finally discovered, because every time we would move to a new duty station, I would spend the first 6 months lost.
Yeah.
I finally discovered it down the street from the church, and it was a health food store with a cafe, and that's where the ladies met. They welcomed me with open arms and explained that when they had gone to the pastor to say, "We'd like to have a prayer shawl group," the pastor had said, "That's great, but you can't meet at church." I want you to meet out in public. I want you to work in community, in the community.
Yeah.
And so people would stop by and talk to us. Children were fascinated by what we were doing. Most people thought it was a really wonderful idea. We would hear stories about their mother or their aunt or their wife who knitted, and it was lovely to hear those stories. And most of the shawls that I made were for the general stash at church. But I started getting what I call the nudge, the urge to make a shawl for a particular person in a particular situation. And I discovered that it was not as easy as choosing yarn, choosing pattern, making the shawl, here you go. Because there would be times when the pattern and the yarn didn't go together. And I would have to listen, either change the yarn, change the pattern until it was right. And when it was right, it was really right. And I began to notice, I began to pay attention to the kinds of situations that God was nudging me over. And it gave me a window into his heart to know the kinds of things he cares about. And I think one of the things, and I'm sorry, I'm a crier, one of the things that was the most surprising to me, but meaningful to me, is that he showed me that prayer shawls are for the unspeakable sorrows, the things for which there is no remedy.
Yeah.
There was a young woman in my Bible study on Post who didn't get along with her mother, and her mother passed away before they ever reconciled. And even worse, her mother disowned her in her will. So you can imagine there is no recourse. There is no way to reconcile. There is no way to make this right.
Yeah.
What do you do with a sorrow like that? As fast as I could, I made her a shawl. And even now, she says, no one else is allowed to cry on my prayer shawl.
Mm.
And so so the prayer shawls that I was making were not only affecting the people who received them, but they were changing me. They were
Yeah.
expanding my understanding of the heart of God. They were making me more sensitive to the people and the situations around me. And I began to wonder if I could write a novel that would get this idea across.
Mhm.
And that's that was the seed of that book.
Yeah.
One of the situations, do you remember when Jane talked about getting pressured into making a shawl and the shawl got lost in the mail?
Yes.
Well, my mother-in-law is a very persuasive person,
Okay.
charming and persuasive. And one of my sisters-in-law, Reggie, had experienced one of those unspeakable sorrows. Her youngest daughter died of complications of drug use. And I immediately started making a shawl. I found this yarn that was in these vibrant waves of color with sequins worked into it, which made me think of the way this young woman was. When she was at her best, she absolutely sparkled. She was vibrant. And so I made her the prayer shawl, and my youngest sister-in-law saw it and told my mother-in-law, I want a blingy prayer shawl. My sister-in-law had not undergone any sorrow, any stress, but my mother-in-law leaned on me and I caved. And I made a shawl very, very quickly with resentment in my heart
Yeah.
and sent it off with a wing and not much of a prayer. And I didn't hear back from my sister-in-law. I thought, I wonder. Well, then I got the packaging back, minus the shawl. They had been separated in the mail, and it never
Gosh.
got to her. And
Wow.
I felt thoroughly spanked. And I learned, number one, don't make a shawl unless you get the nudge for a particular
Mhm.
person, unless
Yeah.
you get the nudge, even if it's your wonderful, persuasive mother-in-law, no matter who does the nudging. It has to be the Holy Spirit. And number two, don't ever, ever make a shawl with a grudging heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that could be applied to any service that we give to others. You know, it might not be a prayer shawl, but it might be bringing a meal to someone or helping them in a Sunday school class or, you know, just whatever, or helping our neighbor. We can do it with begrudging heart and say, I don't think they deserve this, and why do I have to do this? And it doesn't do us any good, and it doesn't benefit the other person as much either. But that is very good advice because I know I have done service in both ways also. or or doing it with a kind and grateful heart. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard in those situations where um, you have some negative feelings to be able to turn those into more positive, gracious feelings. So it's a good lesson.
Yeah, and that sister-in-law did get a prayer shawl later on when she
Good.
needed one.
Perfect. So these characters in the Dragon Lady book, are any of them based on real people from your prayer shawl group? Do any of them resemble you? Because I know authors put a little bit of themselves in their characters. Is there a piece of you in some of these people?
Well, usually the characters, there might be someone that inspires that character, but once they start talking and interacting with each other, they very, very quickly become themselves.
Yes.
But Rose was inspired by my prayer shawl friend, Sarah Tillery. She's in heaven now. I did let her read a pre-published draft. She got to
Uh,
read it before she died. But she was the kind of person that if I could sit next to her at prayer shawl, man, I was right there. You just wanted to be with her and be around her. One time, her great-grandchildren were visiting and they got up to mischief in her basement and had painted her basement floor with some paint that they found there. Their parents were obviously mortified and felt like some punishment should be meted out. So they told their kids, you're going to go to her house and you're going to do chores for her. And they're going, when can we go? So
uh,
um, parts of Sarah live on in Rose. Um, I drew from my own experience with grieving from my dad for Fran.
mhm,
That feeling of, I didn't realize how much energy grief took until 9 months after my father's death. I felt like I was waking up and I didn't even know that I'd been asleep.
yeah.
And so I drew from that for Fran. And then for Jane, Jane is a lot like me because I have a Kenny who is thankfully now clean, sober, out of prison, off parole, all of those good things. But Jane actually helped me with regard to that son
Mhm,
because when I wrote the forgiveness scene, I was trying to write myself to forgiving him
mhm,
because I knew I was supposed to.
yeah.
I pray the Lord's Prayer just about every day, and
Mhm,
it's very, very clear what God expects. But I couldn't get there. And when I finished writing that scene, I still wasn't there. But then a year later, my son was arrested again. And this time it looked like he might be put away for a very long time.
mhm,
And I realized that I was accountable for the realizations that Jane had had, that her son could die in prison with all of that ugliness still between them.
yeah.
And I thought, I have to now. I
Yep.
have to. And so I knew I couldn't do it by myself. So I went to my pastor and he led me through it and we prayed together. And then there was a time where he just sat and talked with me about it. And he said, you remember this day. This is the day that you forgave him. And every day after this is working it out. So it doesn't matter how you feel. It's
Yeah.
what you do. It's what you continue to do. And now this son, I mean, the words that passed between us when he was a teenager and a young man would turn the air blue. And I thought that things would never be right between us. But now I get the random text. I love you so much, Mom. And he always, when he lives in Denver, he had to get out of Texas to get away from the life that he'd been in. When we go to Denver in the summer, he always takes days off to make sure that he can spend time with us.
That's nice. What a good story. I think that
Yeah.
can give hope to a lot of people who have strife with children after they grow up into adulthood and don't always see eye to eye with their parents. And so that's a lovely, hopeful story.
Yeah. So Margaret was the surprise for me.
Yeah.
I um I wrote about her because I'm not a bossy person. And I was wondering, I kept wondering, how can people just feel so comfortable steamrolling over other people to get their own way?
Yeah.
I have a number of bossy women in my life. My
Uh-huh.
mother-in-law, one of my grandmothers. Um, every church has at least one. And so it was an exploration of why are people like this? And I discovered as I explored it, there are a lot of different reasons to be bossy. One of my
Yeah.
nieces said, well, I just have all the best ideas. But as I as I got to the core of Margaret, I realized that she and I were not all that different. Because do you remember that son that was born almost 2 months early?
Yep.
I talked to God a whole lot about that, and I wanted to know why it had happened. I had taken good care of myself during that pregnancy, and I want to know why it happened. And he stonewalled me for an entire year. He wouldn't tell me until I finally said uncle and said, okay, I don't care. I don't want to know why anymore. I just want to be friends again. And that's when he reminded me of that prayer that I had prayed when I was 19 about adventure. And I immediately knew what he meant by that. He wasn't saying, you asked me for an adventure. What are you whining about? What he was saying was, dear heart, you still want to be comfortable. That's why you're struggling.
Yeah.
And once I accepted that, I was like, okay, let's do this thing. Let's do this thing.
Yeah.
And after I got past that, I realized that the reason that I wanted to know why was that I never wanted to hurt that much in my life ever again. And if
Yeah.
I knew why, I could keep it from happening again.
Yep. Prevent it, control it.
But when you give your life and your heart to God, you give him carte blanche.
Yep.
You open your arms and you can say, you're saying, you can kiss me or kill me.
Hmm.
Whatever it is that you want of me, I'm
Yeah.
going to give it to you.
Yeah.
That's the kind of surrender and commitment that he wants. So, as I said, that was Margaret's.
Hmm.
That was Margaret, and other women that have talked to me about Margaret have said, I want to control things too because I want to keep bad things from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So fascinating. Well, I want to take a minute and open it up and see if anybody else on the call has a specific question that I have not asked yet. Go ahead, Linda.
I wonder if you are wearing a prayer shawl.
Well, it's not exactly a prayer shawl. It is a shawl that I made. It's my favorite shawl.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I teach crochet at the local yarn shop, and the woman who owns the shop is also a designer. And this is one of her designs. She also dyes yarn. And so this is her yarn and her pattern. And it was one of those times where the yarn and the pattern just went together and it was perfect. In fact, she took it to a Fiber Fest as a sample one time and got offered like $450 for it.
Oh,
But no, this can never be recreated. So
That's lovely.
thank you. Thank you.
any other
And
questions?
I had wondered, and Debbie kind of covered this with you, is how much of this story was true life, and uh, apparently it's built on a lot of the actual things that happened in your life.
Yes. And also, um, as I was revising the book, I realized that the stakes were just not high enough. And that summer, our pastor went on sabbatical, and our assistant pastor, who had rescued the church from oblivion several years, a number of years before, was taking care of us during that time. And he wanted to remind our church of our history, about how we had started in this tiny building in Waxahachie that had dwindled down almost to nothing, and the bishop had sent him to close it. But as I heard the bishop say at a one time when he was honoring Father Jerry, he said, "Jerry Hill is a total failure at closing churches." And he revived that church to the point where they were bursting at the seams, and
Wow.
and had to build the church that I now attend. I wasn't there at the little church, but the church that I now attend. And that gave me the impetus for raising the stakes,
Mm,
because it had been very real for my church.
yeah.
There's so many churches now around where I live that are closing down, especially the big old inner city churches. And I am a member of one of those. And we recently, well, just last week, got a brand new minister, a woman. And we used to have prayer blankets, the kind that you tied the fringe on. And then when Joanne Fabric went out of business, they couldn't find nice fabric. So they ended it. And so I thought, give this lady a little time, but I want to bring your book to her. And it's like, maybe we can do prayer shawls instead of
Yes,
prayer
Yeah.
blankets.
What a great
yes,
idea.
yes, because the community that grows up in that, I mean, because some of our prayer shawl makers do it at home because they're working or they can't come out. But others, there's four of us that are like a core group that meet at a coffee shop in Waxahachie. And these are my dearest friends to whom I tell things that I don't tell anyone else. And we
Mm.
have a saying, what happens at prayer shawl stays at prayer shawl.
Mm.
And what is really awesome, however, is you can imagine that a coffee shop can be kind of loud,
Yeah,
especially if they're grinding the beans. And
sure.
it's also in an old train depot, so the train goes by. And some of the ladies who wanted to be in the group are hard of hearing, and it
Mm.
made it very difficult for them to follow conversations. And so they started their own group, an offshoot of ours, at one of the retirement communities before, I mean, around the time that this book came out. They came about totally independent of each other. But there's a group of elderly ladies at this retirement community who meet on Thursday afternoons in the quiet.
Very
So
interesting.
I also wanted to ask about this quilt that you have behind you. Are you also a quilter?
Well, I am a quilter, but I did not make this one. One of my college roommates made this for me. I had always wanted a bookshelf quilt,
Okay.
but I had never said to anyone that I wanted a bookshelf quilt.
Uh-huh.
And she presented me with it for my birthday several years ago. And it even has, let's see if I can find it. Right up here. You can't,
We
here,
can't see
let
that.
me lift that up. No. Ah, right,
There
right
we
up
go.
there. See?
Oh, there it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And then down here is my husband's book.
Oh,
And it was such a loving gift. I cried when I opened it up. I
I
wasn't
bet.
expecting it at all.
Okay, so there's a twist to your story. Your husband is also a writer. Tell us
Yes,
about
he is.
that.
Well, during his last year or so in the military, my husband suffered a major depression. And when he came out of it, as he got well, he wanted to make sure that other men didn't go through what he went through. He learned an awful lot in counseling. He's learned a lot about himself, and he's learned a lot about men and depression. Men, especially first responders, military, police officers, etc., have this facade of I'm squared away.
Yeah.
I'm not struggling. I'm fine.
Hmm.
And men also tend not to be in very good touch with their emotions.
Hmm.
It's called, I think it's alexithymia is the word for it. I mean, they recognize two emotions: happiness, that's when their team is winning, and anger when their team is losing.
Yeah.
But they don't understand all of the spectrum in between, and it gets them into trouble because they don't know that they're getting into trouble because they're
Yeah.
not paying attention to their emotions. And so he wrote a book, Wrestling Depression is Not for Wimps.
Mm.
He's a lifelong, he wrestled from eighth grade into college. And then he also wrestled as an adult in a couple of veterans tournaments when he was in his 50s. And actually is a national wrestling champion, but he's
Wow.
learned a lot of lessons about mental health from wrestling. He can use that as a metaphor.
Yeah. How
For
neat.
example, there's a saying in wrestling where the head goes, the body follows. If you can control your opponent's head, you can make him do stuff that you want him to do. Well, isn't that what's going on when we're
Yeah.
depressed?
Yeah.
Our thoughts are not where they need to be. And,
Right.
and if we can get control of those thoughts, if we can counter those thoughts, it can help a lot. Because my husband, who is a physician, a very competent physician, beautiful bedside manner, very dedicated, also was the chief of his department, the Department of Internal Medicine at at Eisenhower Army Medical Center. A well-respected and skilled leader was in the pit of despair, listening to a voice that said, "You're a fake. You don't deserve to be a colonel. You let your department down. You let your family down. You let the army down. Nobody's going to want to hire you when you get out." Nothing could be further from the truth. But
Yeah.
he was, for a while there, until he realized that he needed help, he listened to that.
Yeah.
It was destroying him. He was crumbling before my eyes.
Mhm.
But now he's not only written the book, but he does public speaking. He's done a TEDx talk about it. And I'm very, very proud of him for being a steward of his pain.
Yeah. Wow. What a wonderful way to make lemons out of your lemonade, right? To
Yes.
take those
Your mess
painful
is your
things and
message, as my husband says.
yes, I've heard that one too. Yep, turning your mess into a message. Excellent. I love it. Well, we're getting close to time being up, but I would love to hear what are you working on now? Do you have some more books in the work? What's coming next?
Well, I finished what I hope will be the third book in the Pearls and Prayers series.
Okay.
I wasn't sure I could pull it off, so I didn't like make a synopsis or a proposal. I waited till I actually finished it before I sent it to my agent. It's in her hands now, and she'll look it over, give me suggestions. I'll fix it, and then she'll send it on to the publisher, and we'll see what they say. But the working title, which I've learned not to get attached to, is Heaven's Eyes. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know if you've thought about this, but you know, Amy had a baby, right?
Uh-huh.
Where is her mother? And I began to ask that question, And I realized Amy and her mother don't get along.
Mhm.
Amy doesn't fit her mother's expectations. She can't make herself fit her mother's expectations. Unlike Amy's older sister, Paige the Perfect.
Mhm.
And this story is about them. Well, and it's fine for a while. I mean, but Amy has not even told her mother that she's had a baby.
Okay.
They live in different states.
Mhm.
Her mother comes to town on business. Amy tries to get out of having dinner with her mother, but neither the Wool Gatherers or the Heavenly Hugs are having any of that. And so she ends up having dinner with her mother, but not telling her mother anything, just getting out of it with nothing more than a lecture about how she's undereducated, underemployed, and really ought to get back together with her rich high school boyfriend. Oh, and she's also put on weight. But then her mother gets a promotion and is transferred to the city where Amy lives. And the rest of the book is about that dilemma and what happens.
Interesting. Wow.
Also, Father Pete's solution to all of this, because she gets the news that her mother's being transferred after church.
Okay.
She turns off her notifications during church. She turns
Yep.
them on. She's in the foyer and she feels like she's going to throw up. And Father Pete takes her and Bry into the prayer chapel and they pray. And then he invites them to this. Well, Bry has already been going to the Seeker's Bible study and he invites Amy. He says,
Mm.
I think the answer to this is you coming to the Seeker's study. Amy cannot see any way that that's going to help, but it actually does. And I'll leave it at that.
Interesting. So before we started the recording, you were talking a little bit about the title, and I want to make sure we get that story in here. So, The Unlikely Yarn of the Dragon Lady, it was not the title, it was not your working title,
Mm-mm.
and it was chosen by committee. So tell us a little bit of that story of how the title came to be.
Well, they just presented, well, as I said, in the marketing questionnaire, they asked for suggestions. I think it was
Mhm.
so that the titling committee could riff off of it.
Yeah,
And my agent had already prepared me for the fact that they would change the name.
yeah.
The original name was the Heavenly Hugs Prayer Shawl Ministry, which
Hmm.
they felt appealed only to a certain demographic,
Yeah.
when it's actually a multi-generational book.
Mhm.
So they wanted something that would make people pick it up and
Yeah,
look at it. And I think it does.
yeah. But this was one of the names you threw out there for
Oh,
them.
no, not the unlikely part. I think it
Uh-huh.
was something like the Dragon Lady makes a prayer shawl, I think
Okay.
is what I had written.
Yeah. And then they just played with it. And then your second book, the wool gathering, I don't remember how that
The
goes.
Tangled Tale of the Wool Gathering Cast-Offs.
And did you have input on that one at all?
I just gave them the Wool Gatherers.
Okay.
That was my working title. I
Yeah.
couldn't think of anything else. And I'd learned to trust them, even though I'm going, wow,
Right.
that's a long, convoluted title. Some
Yes.
people are going to be put off by that, but I thought
They know what
they
they're
were
doing.
right. They were right about the Dragon Lady. They're
Yep.
right about this. But then for Grandma Ruth doesn't go to funerals was my working title.
Oh.
And they ask you to explain why
Uh-huh.
you like that title. And I talked about how I had written a series of short stories, and each of them is about a place that Grandma Ruth used to go, but can't go anymore. Like I've got one called Grandma Ruth Doesn't Go to Chick-fil-A, because what I called the magic Chick-fil-A in Augusta, Georgia, where the writing would always go well. If you went early enough on Monday morning, a van would pull up from a retirement community. A bunch of retired folks would get out and play bingo at Chick-fil-A. And I thought that
Mm.
was fabulous.
Yeah,
And of course, Grandma Ruth used to play bingo at Chick-fil-A.
of course. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, before we end, we want to know what is the best way to connect with you online, website, social media? What's the best way?
My website is www.sharonjmondragon.com. But you can also email me at sharonjmondragon@gmail.com.
Okay, so great ways to reach out to you. And then a reminder to everyone that if you've read the book, now please go review the book wherever you purchased
Oh,
it
thank you.
or online at Amazon or Goodreads, because that is just so helpful for authors is to get those reviews. That helps books get seen a little more. So thank you again for being here. We just appreciate you telling your story to us, Sharon, and we appreciate your books and look forward to reading more of them.
Well, thank you for listening.